Well, hello there, and welcome to the Radical World, the podcast. And today we have Bert Painter. I'm Jose Leal, one of the co-founders of Radical. Matt Perez is not here today, but we're going to be having an opportunity to have a conversation with Bert about what we both love to think about is how do we reinvent work? Is that the way we put it, Bert? How do we reinvent work?
Yeah, particularly the invention of the future of work.
The future of work. Awesome. So, Bert, our audience hasn't met you before. You're a first-time contributor, guest, fellow communicator in here. And so, tell us about a little bit about yourself. What got you into this space? What made you think this is an exciting thing to do?
Well, first off, Jose, I very much am excited having met you and the whole work that you and Matt are doing in the radical world. And it feels very kind of close to my own desires and aspirations and experience. And also, we're fellow Canadians. That means something to me. But in some respects, if I think about it very personally, the origins of getting involved in this activity of supporting people to invent their own futures comes from maybe a couple of sources. One is that my father was an engineer who worked in manufacturing, and I got very sensitive to the technical, but as well the way the human interfaces with the technical dimension of work through his experience as an engineer. Another might be that my own first real activity as a worker, if you like, was as a film producer, writer. So I spent the first 6 or 7 years of my working life as a film producer, and I moved very kind of non-sequentially into this work of research and consulting with organizations, and I think one of the things that I draw upon is the sense of drama. In the same way that a film is a story, I see the work that I'm doing in aid of people's invention of their futures. It's a bit like rewriting their own scripts.
Mm-hmm.
And always I'm engaged with people in some form of drama. And that's part of the excitement and the allure for me is to be able to swim in that drama. And
I did not expect that. I didn't expect that answer. So thank you for that. So the idea that you created narratives to explain stories of what was going on in the world around you through the work that you were doing. You're sort of making a connection between that work and the power for people to actually create their own stories and within their work lives.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I like that. That because when you said your dad was an engineer, my early career was architecture. And so the structure, there's something about it, right? Like seeing structures in it.
My dad wanted to be an architect, but
every engineer wants to be an architect.
Yeah, but he came out of the Depression, and he could only afford a certain amount of schooling, so he never realized that dream of being an architect. So in a sense, what we do, I see, is very much a form of architecture, only that we're not the architects. We are those that are supporting the real architects of the future, which are the people themselves who are doing the work.
I'd agree with that, but having worked in architecture, that's what architects do. So I worked I worked in custom residential for a while, mostly custom residential, but a little bit of small commercial. And what I found interesting working with architects with families was capturing the family's needs and desires. and understanding what they wanted
Mhm.
the structure to support. And I think it's very similar to what we're talking about in the domain of work. It's a little different, but I think it bears to that a bit.
I think that's the way some architects approach their work, but I think a lot of architects get caught up in being the designers, and they create this beautiful design of a building, say, without really linking it and building from the experience of those who are going to be living and working and using that building, for example. I I think, and that really speaks to the challenge that most of the work I've been involved with has encountered, which is that most times people are given technology that they need to fit themselves to in some way, rather than
Mhm.
fitting the technology in themselves together, making more of an alignment rather than and which both need to be designed the way that people interact and the way the technology interacts with people. Um, most of my experiences, people are really initially coming from situations where they've had their environment imposed upon them.
Right. And that,
Not in a way that necessarily is seen to be autocratic, but that's just part of life, you know?
well, that's the way we think of it,
Yeah, yeah,
that it
exactly.
is part of life because the technology of organizational structures and organizations and our economic system isn't life. It is a created set of structures,
Mhm.
and somebody's created them for some purpose.
Yeah,
And we, especially when we're growing up, the assumption is I've got to live within those structures because those are the structures everybody tells me I need to abide by, be it in school or in work, in society as a whole. We're sort of uh, having to put ourselves within those structures that somebody else has designed. And I think that the work that we're doing collectively is to sort of make that transparent. These things were designed for a purpose at some point with likely good intentions, but they may not serve you and they may not serve us as a whole. So, how do we do this better and different? Does that feel right to you?
mhm. Yes, it does. Yeah, yeah.
So that said, where did you start off in this work? What was the thing that you're like, okay, you have this impetus for it, but um,
Well, uh, most times initially, I got involved with people in organizational settings because of um, economic or social problems that existed in these situations. For example, my first few engagements where I made this quite uh, nonsensical transfer from the film world into research and consulting in industrial settings was in sawmills and forest products companies in northern British Columbia, where I live. These are remote locations, and where the people were working in fairly routinized situations. And what led to my getting involved were problems of very high levels of labor of turnover of people. People didn't stay very long in these organizations. They earned enough to make their bundle, and then they would leave as quickly as they could because it was not an environment where they really found fulfillment, but they would find some economic reward. And this was not necessarily very good for the company or very good for the folks themselves, really. And so I was one of the folks that was engaged to help them uh, find another path. And so I was involved in working with people in the plant, managers and frontline sawmill workers, many of whom did not have much beyond some portion of high school education, to redesign their own work processes in these plants. And it was really an amazing experience to me because I had not done this kind of work before. I was learning from people at the Tavistock Institute in England uh, who were brought to Canada to help educate folks in the design of socio-technical systems. In other words, designing work systems that uh, try to integrate the social and technical aspects to realize outcomes that are both high performance in terms of productivity and so forth, but are also humanly fulfilling.
Hmm.
And that combination is not necessarily one that people try to achieve simultaneously.
Right.
They will oftentimes do one or the other, but
Right.
not both. So it was a change for them and a change for me, and it was a one. I mean, I did that work particularly in coal mines and in sawmills, in pretty remote locations for about 4 or 5 years as my apprenticeship to learn this work. And then I got more into office settings and in manufacturing systems and steel plants and so forth, insurance companies, where I was helping people invent their own futures. Sometimes, I mean, I had one engagement with a telephone company, for example, later on in my career, which was again driven by a negative experience where telephone operators were experiencing these extremely high levels of stress in terms of the need before the days of highly digitized
Right.
telephone
Right.
systems to give people telephone information and connect them from one call to another.
We
I want
forget about those,
to
don't we?
Jose Leal, right? Okay, yes, he's in San Francisco. Oh, yeah, yeah. What's his number? Right? They had to respond within like 15, 30 seconds. Very high. I mean, they had such stress that they were experiencing, um, uh, you know, shocks in their ears, and then really discomfort. And
Hmm.
at the end of the day, they were able to redesign their work. I mean, I won't go into details necessarily. Time won't
Right.
allow, but they redesigned their work um, such that they became more involved or as much involved in customer service and the administration of the telephone system as they did in answering telephone operator calls. And they were actually amongst the first telephone operators in North America for whom electronic surveillance was stopped. So they were not measured on how many seconds anymore it took them to respond. Nonetheless, they improved customer service as a result by the way they
Right.
transformed their work. And I'll
Right.
never forget a woman who was a senior member of the union for the telephone operators saying to me, "We are no longer just an operator."
We're part of a team.
By how they had redesigned their work.
Right. Can you give us a sense of time? When was that?
That would have been late 90s, somewhere around there. Yeah. It was just before the whole, I mean, there was still a lot of automation, but it was really
Right.
not the highly digitized systems we're talking about today.
Right. But that's still quite late in the evolution of the
Yeah,
telephone system,
yeah, yeah,
and so it's surprising that that was happening that late.
yeah. Well,
But
it was not uncommon.
right, and it's still in many industries, not obviously that type of work, but that level, the surveillance, the mandates of timing, and the mandates of checking what people are doing, how they're doing it, whether they're doing it in a way that someone dictates that they should be doing them, is not uncommon in our
Well,
workplaces
and
today.
now it's increasingly not just someone; it's a system. For example, I went from this work with the telephone operators to an insurance company. There was, again, this was at the turn of the century into the early 2000s. So that's a time period where a paper process basically of an insurance company was being transformed to electronic system.
Hmm.
And what was happening was the company, quite, with all the best intentions, was bringing in software to transform their work processes in this insurance company. Problem was that the software, even though it had been utilized in a number of other similar situations, was not really adapted to the needs of this particular insurance company. And the insurance agents were extremely frustrated by the initial designs of the software that were brought forward. Uh, and thankfully, the company was ready to involve them in the redesign of the software and the work processes, and actually to work with through all of this, the insurance agents in the front line, with the support and involvement of management, were able to build whole new connections with physicians and folks that were trying to work on the remediation of people that were being provided insurance benefits in a way that wasn't possible prior to this new software, but wasn't possible with the design that was brought forward by the initial IT.
Hmm.
So it wasn't any individual that was imposing the system, it
Right,
was
right.
the system.
It's the system. And the system is a bunch of us, not them, but us, going through um, the process of taking an individual and their sort of responsibility and abdicating it to the system. And we all sort of do that. We do that with the structures of our organizations. We do that with the technologies and the systems in our organizations. We essentially, we've built what we call a fiat system, a system of control, simply by the fact that the people in it are going through the process of making the system more refined and losing touch with the people and the needs of the people in that process. Is that your sense of how it works?
Yeah, because all of these so-called systems do involve the interaction of people and other people and technology. And from a socio-technical standpoint, rather than a system that is fixed or trying to get the best alignment of, of the of the elements of some interaction between people and technology, one that where people actually experience fulfillment and not just sort of some routine behavior gets accomplished.
So I just alluded to the idea of fiat
Yeah,
being this, what we call the fiat lens and the fiat system, which is the way we see the world
well,
as
yeah.
a system of, this is the way it is, somebody's told us it is,
So,
and this is the way we do it.
yeah. So Jose, I don't know if this fits with what you're saying from the work that you do, but in the work that I'm involved with and my colleagues, we ask folks to consider two different design principles for the way that they design work systems. And one is design principle one, where the coordination of work at one level of activity is controlled by a higher level.
Okay.
And design principle two is where the coordination and control of the work process is done by the people actually doing the work, at the level of people doing the work. And those two design principles probably correspond to the distinctions that you would make between the fiat model
The radical model.
and the radical model. And those are very, very important distinctions in terms of design principle. But they're not that complicated once people understand what we mean. That essentially the system is a coordinating activity. A lot of what we call systems are coordinating activities.
Hmm.
Um, and the
And
question is, what level is doing the coordination?
right, is it being coordinated by the doers
Mm,
or by the tellers?
right.
And we have a system, a society that for the most part is built by tellers and not the doers, right? And so when we talk about the future of work and reinventing this workplace, what are your thinking? What are you doing in that space? How are you bringing this about?
Well, again, I'll give you an example. I mean, trying to make it very specific, and I do this because I guess I look at all these things as stories, as dramas, right? So
Hmm.
now we're beyond the age of just automation. We're in the age of AI. So one organization I'm working with, is a situation where there's people that are field technicians. They're fairly well trained, uh, who daily were employed to go out. This is for a pulp mill. They would go out and measure the volume of different species of chips, which are the wood material from which we
Hmm.
make pulp
Right.
or paper. And so it's very important for a manufacturer to know what their actual chip supply is for different species. They go out and measure this every day. So suddenly, someone in the company discovers the idea of using drones, which are AI operated, to do this measurement.
Hmm.
Well,
Because just to get a picture here, there's a huge pile of these things,
yeah,
and there's no easy way to know how much of it there is. So someone would have to physically survey the piles to see exactly what's there and make estimates of how much is
yeah,
remaining in those piles.
exactly. And now we have a drone that can do that
Right.
and probably do it more accurately. So the question becomes, I mean, what does this mean about the the employment of these people? They're not a great number of people, but there's a good handful of people that do this work in this company. What does it mean about their work life? And what does it mean for them to respond to this new technology that suddenly is being said, okay, that's going to be used to do the work, much of the work that you do.
Right.
So what happened was the company was willing to engage with these field technicians in figuring out what their future was going to be, the future of their work. What that became was that they these folks became trained in the programming and the operation of these drones, but not just to measure the volume of wood chips that were in the uh,
Hmm.
yards of these companies. But they went on to operate these drones in ways that were useful for the company in their environmental management of um, forests that are harvested to supply the mills. They became drone operators uh, that were useful in overseeing construction projects the company was doing. They were transformed from being field techs that measured volumes of wood supply to being drone technicians on a broader scale within the company. They were given the opportunity to shape their and design their own future of work.
That's a great story because very often we're seeing it now here in the valley. The corporation decides we're no longer doing this product, and so everybody that's associated with that product is gone, right? And from the perspective of the the employees, they could very easily fit somewhere else in the organization. Um, and so the idea that we can um, let those folks help not only maintain their jobs, but find the roles that are necessary to move forward as we introduce new technologies or change the direction of the organization or whatever it is. So it's back to who's making the decision.
Right. And particularly in terms of for these folks, really inventing the future of their work.
Right.
And I think there's all sorts of forms of that question that are popping up every day in smaller ways for people, particularly in this era of AI. And many people are asking the question, well, what is the future of work? And they looked to some very, very knowledgeable people and consulting companies to tell them what the future is. I think what's more important is to invent that future. I don't think
Together.
we really know what the future is, and to rely upon someone's prescription is what AI is going to be useful for. That's not near as meaningful as for people to be able to determine what that use can be, and that can augment their contribution.
So a lot of the work that we've done is not only in the work that people are doing within the organization, but the organization, the structure of the organization, the way that it's composed. So we've talked about who gets to make decisions, who gets to design the future of work, who gets to design their work, and we're complete alignment. It's the people doing it that should be doing all of that. But organizations are structured where you have owners that are independent of workers. They're designed where you have bosses that are independent of staff. So have you done any work in the realignment of what the structure of an organization is? Because when Matt and I co-wrote the book, Radical Companies, what we proposed was that we should have companies that are that have neither bosses nor employees. That what we have is a collaborative environment where people are making decisions together, not being told what to do and not being the ones telling others what to do. And that led us to rethinking the idea of a company as a co-owned and co-managed organization. Does that resonate at all? Have you played with any of those things at this point?
I'm not sure if this is a direct answer to your question, Jose, but I mean, in almost all these cases, the structure gets changed because people's roles change significantly. And usually, as design principle 2 is applied, it means that what may have been, say, the role of supervisors or managers to manage the coordination of people at a level below them, that gets transformed too. So the overall structure gets changed.
Mm-hmm.
Not just individual roles, in order
Right.
to make these changes in people's activity real. But in terms of altering the form of ownership,
Right.
maybe what you're speaking to directly, I have some, and there are people that I work with, people that are colleagues of mine that have much more experience in the field of employee ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had one occasion of working in that particular situation. I mean, I don't know whether it's formally defined as employee ownership. A lot of the situations that I'm talking about in terms of people starting to really be able to manage the invention of their own futures, they are acting as owners.
Right.
In fact, really what one is trying to realize is a situation where people feel that whether they are actually owning physical assets, they are owning the value that is being delivered to clients and to customers. And and it's not just the bosses who's owning that. I'm owning
Right.
that.
Well, and I can hear Matt in the background here saying, uh, but ultimately the owner gets to pull the plug on whatever is going on at some point if he chooses to or they choose to.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Um, and so that feeling piece is can feel somewhat manipulative in some
Right.
cases.
But the other part of the story, though, um, we've heard about quiet quitting, is that folks at the front lines who are not feeling that they are really owners of this product or service,
Engaged, yeah.
they withdraw.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, from my standpoint, we talk about investors, financial investors in a company, in a private company. Um, the workforce is investing all the time, every minute of the day. They're investors.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not just, they're not just stakeholders. They are investors.
And in many ways they're investing their lives,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just money,
Not
but
just
their
something.
lives.
Yes, exactly. Something
And
much deeper.
that's I think the conversation around what we call a radical lens, which is a recognition that our work as human beings isn't to actually be in service to an organization who seeks some job done,
Yeah.
but actually to engage in work that is fulfilling to us and serves life and humanity and nature, not the other way around.
I think part of what interested me, Jose, in meeting with you and Matt in the radical world is that I think where you are engaged is uh, where I would, you know, I guess most like to be engaged if possible. But most situations are not structured that way
Mhm.
in in our current, you know, and so it may very well be said that myself and most of our colleagues were not dealing with quite the level of development that you're able to achieve in a radical world, but we are able to achieve a lot more than what is conventionally taken for granted. A lot
Right,
more. Like I
right.
say, I have the continual fulfillment and satisfaction of hearing in my head workers say, like, I'm not just an operator anymore. Or, believe it or not, a manager saying for the first time, now that we're operating under different principles, I feel I'm a leader like I've never felt myself before.
And there's a huge difference between that and being a
Exactly,
boss and being a leader, isn't there?
exactly, exactly.
And there are leaders in every role, and there's leaders that are bosses and leaders that aren't bosses.
Right. Yeah.
And that I think is the big difference. We often talk about the concept of leadership, and we had a conversation a few weeks ago with someone who said, leadership is being willing to be the one that bends over and picks up trash off the floor, because it needs to be done, and you don't position yourself above that work or above that task that needs to be done. And all too often, we've conditioned people to stay in their level of operation, whatever that
Hmm.
happens to be. Right. And that's really the organizations that we have today is stay in your lane. For the most part, stay in your lane, listen to whatever the other lane tells you to do. And that's where we're at. So the work that you're doing, I think, is first, it's always heartening to see that others are doing this work. You've been doing it for a long time, and you have a community of folks around you that are doing this work in what sounds like a very compelling way of transforming the existing organizations through their pain points, if you will, towards something better.
But yeah, I mean, another story that some of my colleagues are involved with that's happening right now is in agriculture. Right now, we're having in North America, I think, we're undergoing and are going to potentially undergo even greater industrial transformation of agriculture at a time when there's a possibility for a different route where growers and farm workers are able to utilize the new technology in ways that are much more effective on a smaller scale.
Hmm.
Um, but these are choices that we have to make, and it's not everybody that's willing to make those choices or to try to make those choices because it's
Right.
not easy to to
No.
I mean, there's a you know conventional wisdom and forces are extremely powerful. So
Absolutely. And Matt and I had that conversation last week where it is really easy. We're working with some folks here and there, and it's really easy to see them fall back into the cycle of um, of the old way, right? Even though they've thought through these new ways and felt a sense of independence, that they end up sort of falling back into that thinking of somebody needs to tell me what to do. And that's a very difficult thing for all of us to support each other in that process of moving away from being stuck in a system where we think that the system is fixed rather than under our control. And to me, that difficulty sits in both the artifacts that are around us
mhm.
that have become static and our mindset that assumes that we need to do whatever the artifacts are dictating us to do. And that's a big difference from what you're proposing and the work that we're doing as well. Well, Bert, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you for um, taking the time to have this conversation. I'd love to have another conversation with you. And I know you've got an event in September that your folks are coming together at up in Vancouver.
Yeah, we are. The Roundtable is sponsoring a, a very interactive conference. You may call it more like a hackathon than a conference, where we are bringing together groups of people in cohorts from different industries like agriculture and healthcare and manufacturing, um, to enable them to prototype futures of human-centered, digitally supported work in their industry. And yeah, we're quite excited about it because, I mean, I think this is where some of the opportunities that do exist can be opened up and become, I feel like, exemplars for others
Mhm.
to think about and be challenged by themselves, whether it be in healthcare or agriculture or manufacturing. Yeah,
Well, I'm looking forward to being involved in that in some way, whatever that might
that'd be
be.
nice. That would be very nice.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Um, thank you. Thank you again for the time. I'm going to introduce the fact that next week it's episode 6 of The Radical Pioneers, or episode 1 of season 2. And I'm not sure which one that is, Carlos, but we're going to find out next week. Um, thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Bert. And I look forward to a future conversation where we go a little deeper into the work that you guys are doing and what happens in September. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.